Welcome to Cleveland Conversations. I'm Ed Horowitz, your host for today's episode. Cleveland is a city of neighborhoods, from Glenville to Ohio City, Slavic Village to Collinwood, each with its own stories, challenges, and sense of identity. But for many years, not all of those stories have been told equally, or even told at all. In today's challenging media landscape, where traditional newsrooms have shrunk and local coverage has thinned, new models of journalism are stepping in to fill the gaps. One of those is The Land, a nonprofit newsroom focused on community-driven reporting, neighborhood voices, and solution-oriented stories. And these span all the way across Northeast Ohio. This is a different vision of journalism. It's one that doesn't just report on communities, but works with them. Part of what they do at The Land is train residents to tell their own stories, bringing attention to issues that might otherwise go overlooked. Today, we're going to explore this model and what it means for the future of local news with Chris Mosby, Executive Director of The Land. Chris, welcome to Cleveland Conversations.
Thanks so much for having me, Ed.
It's great to have you here. Tell us a little bit about The Land for our viewers who may not be familiar with your digital news website.
Sure. We're a 6-year-old local news nonprofit. We cover Cleveland and the inner ring suburbs. As you mentioned, we're focused on solutions-oriented journalism, which we can talk about later. But basically, we focus on training people, giving them a sense of agency and responsibility over the news that's coming out. So we want communities, and specifically the people who make up those communities, to feel engaged in the news-making process.
You feel like, for the most part, if viewers are watching local TV news or reading other major news outlets in the city, they're not feeling as engaged?
It's not necessarily that I am going to say that any outlet is not engaging the audience. It's that I feel like they're sort of removing the ability of individuals to be involved in the actual creation of that news and having responsibility over what's being presented about their communities on airwaves or in publications.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about what you're calling solutions journalism, right? What does that look like in practice?
Yeah, so solutions journalism is a simple concept, and it's basically that most news, whether it's on a breaking news model or otherwise, tends to focus on the problem. It focuses on addiction, it focuses on violence, it focuses on corruption, and with good reason, those stories have to be told. But they're only telling a sliver of what actually is the entirety of the story. And so basically what we want to do is look at how are communities responding to some of these issues, and we're not endorsing any particular solution. What we're doing is we're trying to evaluate the efficacy of every individual solution that's being attempted. So, for example, there was a report a couple years ago that came out about opioid overdose deaths in Slavic Village specifically. There was a host of stories that came out that just looked at the summary page of that particular report, talking about how many overdose deaths had occurred in Slavic Village over a certain period of time, and that was the entirety of the reporting that was done by a lot of outlets. But that was a 40-page report that looked at how the community ended up in this situation, how the community could respond, and how the community was responding. So when we did that story, we asked our writer to look at the whole report, talk to all the researchers, and evaluate the different attempts to try and remedy this addiction crisis that was gripping Slavic Village.
And it's a problem for reporters and news organizations where they just don't have time to read reports like that. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think, I was having a conversation with a friend who is used to be engaged at a major TV news network. And he was frustrated because they would often do parachute journalism, right? That was his verbiage. And the idea being that a reporter would come into a community they weren't familiar with, decide what was important about the story for the community, and then leave immediately afterwards. And what frustrated him and eventually led to his departure from that organization was he felt they were only telling about 2% of the story, and 98% of the story was being left untold. So people were left with a perception of a community that was often deeply negative and focused only on sort of the most sensational aspects of whatever that crisis or incident was.
Sure, and I think probably a lot of the viewers may be familiar with that term because a lot of criticism of national news coverage of the elections, of presidential elections, has been criticism of parachute journalism where reporters from either the West Coast or the East Coast come into middle America, maybe like Ohio, and don't get a real sense of what's going on.
Yeah, you get that story every 4 years about like a diner where somebody goes to an Ohio rural
the diner. Stories.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So it's not parachute journalism. It's trying to get the insight. So give me more specifics about how that works.
Sure.
Who are you getting to be the reporters, and how are they finding the stories? How do you decide what makes it interesting enough that it's going to go into The Land?
Yeah, so we have a mix of two different types of reporters. So we have professional reporters who've been doing this for 10, 15, 20 years, guys like Grant Siegel, guys like Zachary Lewis, former Plain Dealer reporters. There's a type, and I feel bad that I even mentioned names because now I haven't mentioned some other names that deserve recognition. But from the community journalists, these are people who actually live in the neighborhoods. So they live in Glenville, they live in Slavic Village, they live in Ohio City, or they live in one of the inner ring suburbs. We recruit them to come in, and we want that perspective of a resident. We want the perspective of somebody who lives in the neighborhood and knows what actually matters to the community, and also knows that the story that was told by a national organization isn't the entirety of the story, and there's more to be told, both from a background, the nuance and depth of what led to something, and from a solutions aspect.
Mm-hmm. Concerns might be that you were crossing over from what might be considered traditional reporting. If someone's coming to you, maybe they're trying to advocate for a particular problem or advocate for something that they might be interested in. How do you balance that?
Yeah, that's all part of the programming, right? Like we do 12 weeks for every community journalism session. It's 6 weeks of direct education, 6 weeks of small group mentorship. During the education portion, we do explicitly lay out that you can't do a story that you're involved with, can't do a story you're involved with directly, right? So you can't advocate on behalf of a cause where you're the vice chair of a petition that's going out, right? And that has been an issue with explaining that to some new journalists, that this is an ethical line. And I think there's been a misperception of what journalism is because of some of the national stuff that has gone on. So explaining that ethical local journalism doesn't involve that, and in fact we have to remove ourselves from things, is a little bit of a barrier, but we have not yet had a student leave over it, and I think we've been able to address any concerns.
So you're recruiting, and then people can apply to become part of these training sessions. You said they're about 12 weeks long.
Yeah.
How often across the year do you have those?
So last year we did 5 of them.
That's
so
a lot.
Little more than 1 a quarter.
And about how many of those stay with you, for the long term?
So long term, I'd say we get about 50% graduation rate. So which for us, we include not just attending the majority of the classes, but actually publishing an article with us. Those students who publish, I would say 60% of them end up publishing more than 1 article. I'll pick on one of our writers, Sharon Arai. She graduated last year. She's already done 15 articles.
15, that's a lot.
Yes, it's a lot, especially when you consider that most of these people have a day job. The vast majority of these folks are running businesses or they're involved in some way with corporate life.
And do they generally stick with a particular neighborhood where they're from, or do they span out in other places? So for example, if they come from the west side, are they covering stories on the east side as well, or not really?
Usually they stay in their neighborhood, but the writers who do like the number of articles that Sharon does or Taylor Wilson has done, they tend to start to experiment with going further or exploring new topic areas.
Mm-hmm. And if our viewers are interested, that sounds something I might be interested in doing, how can they find out more information
if you go to the Land's website, you can see Write for Us. Right on the homepage, you go down there, you'll see Become a Community Journalist. You can apply right through there.
So it's theland.org.
Thelandcle.org.
Okay, so say it one more time.
Thelandcle.org.
Okay, so all of our viewers can hear about that if they're interested in doing that. You want to check out to try and be a journalist.
I'd love that.
That'd be good, because you're looking for people who are really, and they probably very much care about the community that they're coming from, right? They want to get those stories out.
Always. They are deeply invigorated by local happenings. And we want that. And I will also say, just as a journalist, and Ed, I think you'll appreciate this, it's nice to sit in a room full of people who care about journalism and care about how it's done and how it's conducted, because I think since the advent of the internet and you've had anonymous posters and all sorts of stuff, most of the feedback that journalists get is deeply negative. It's a nice reminder that most people in the community care about their community and they want to see strong local news.
Mm-hmm. And what's some of the challenges from individuals who come and say, I'm interested in doing this, but they, maybe they've read the news, maybe some of them are really not heavy news readers. What kind of gap is there between what they're interested in doing and the skills that they need to have to publish stories? Yeah,
there's sometimes a huge gap, because when you get 15 or 20 students in a session, which is roughly what we do, you will have some students who have a deep background in writing, who really love and understand the news, and you'll get some students who this is new and they just want to try something. And the starting point can be vastly different for different students. We have students sometimes who are as young as 17 and as old as being in their mid-70s. So it's a wide gap of cultural touchstones and different things that just makes a little bit of a gap for teaching, but it also makes for more interesting reporting, because we're getting different aspects and angles from people that wouldn't necessarily occur to other members of the cohort. In terms of, how do we tackle some of the obstacles with folks who come in and have an idea of what local journalism is, our first class is what is journalism, right? And I always say we're trying to develop a shared language, because if I don't define these things, if I don't define journalism, if I don't define what ethical reporting is or local news is, then often we're talking past each other. We're talking about two different things. Or if there's a conception of what news is based off of social media and national news, and it doesn't necessarily jive with what we're trying to implant in their heads, is like, this is what ethical reporting is. So that we always spend at least a few hours in each class talking about, this is what ethical reporting looks like, and this is how we conduct it.
So we're going from solutions journalism, and another term that I know is associated with the land is hyper-local journalism, right? So we're not just local, we are hyper-local, even deeper local than what you might expect. Because if you turn on, the morning news on TV, perhaps as sometimes I do before I'm heading out or taking my kids to school, right? I'll see a story that's in, the reporter is standing outside the Avon City Hall, or they're in Strongsville, or they're in Medina, or they're even at Cleveland City Hall. You're going deeper than things like that.
We try to, and I will say.
What does it mean by hyper-local?
Yeah, and it's interesting you use that term, because if you'd ever attended one of my classes, I'm not saying you should.
I think you're taking my job as a journalism professor here at
I'm
Cleveland
trying
State.
to. We're at odds. But I think I hate that term, hyper-local news. I always think it conjures the image of like us reporting on how tall your neighbor's grass is, and I think that's so loathsome, and that's not what we do. So I always go with the community news, right? And just the idea of being that like, we are telling stories about people in these neighborhoods and about what life is actually like. And I think so much news coming out of certain neighborhoods, whether it's Central or Glenville or certain other neighborhoods, it can be skewed deeply negative, right? And I think there's a bunch of impacts that come from that. I think it gives people a skewed perception of their own neighborhood. I was talking to somebody who had lived in Glenville for a few years, and they were talking about when they moved there, they were so delighted by their neighbors, and they drank wine together on Sundays, and they felt like there was this family environment that they had come into. They were from out of town. And then slowly they started to tune into local news, and all of the stories about Glenville were negative. It was crime, it was corruption, it was decay. And it created a sort of cognitive dissonance between their experience actually living in the neighborhood and what they were being told life in the neighborhood was like. And so what we wanted to do was try and close that gap a little bit, try and get rid of that dissonance, and give people in these communities the chance to talk about what life is actually like, and give them the platform to do it.
Right. I love hearing things like that, because I think people remember the negative, but they really respond more to the positive. I think that's
hope so.
What they want. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So some of the stories that you've covered that have really impacted a lot of people have covered a wide range of things. I know you've been interested, and some of your reporters have been interested in the growing number of data centers here in Northeast Ohio. I know there's one about 20 blocks away from Cleveland State in an old warehouse. I was not, until someone told me, I drive past it, I did not know that was inside there.
Yeah.
Tell me how that's affecting people and what drives your reporters to be interested in covering that.
Yeah, I think the same thing that drives most people to be interested in it, right? Power outages, the questions about their utility bills, the reliability of the infrastructure in our neighborhood, and its ability to withhold, let me try that again, to uphold in the face of all of this new demand on the grid. Those specific stories are driven by their experiences in the neighborhood. It's sitting in Ohio City or Lakewood and not having power for a week. It's having to throw the food out in your fridge. Mm-hmm. It's watching First Energy go to the Public Utilities Commission and ask to have reliability standards lowered so that people can have longer stretches without their power being restored. We just had John Ciccone do a story about how Cleveland City leaders and Lakewood City leaders are moving to try and stop that specific move by First Energy. But that comes on the heels of several stories where people talking about how do we create, going back to solutions journalism, how do we create a more sustainable grid, right? So we've had people working on stories about what can we do to integrate more green energy, what can we do to make the grid work for normal people and not just for data centers.
So when people, for example, Cleveland Public Power is well known for having often losing power for people, as opposed to other areas. Certain areas in town never lose their power. So are those data grids here in Cleveland, are they affecting those power outages based on your reporting from your
Some of our reporters would say yes. Mm-hmm. I think some reporters would be hesitant to commit to definitively saying yes or no. And I'll skew that direction in this moment.
Okay. You've also done an interesting story recently about some of the noise pollution problems out in Birdtown, out in that part of the city. What's going on out there?
Yeah, so that's actually a great story that was done by a community journalist of ours, Ava Strazak, who came through our program last year. She lives in Birdtown, right? So she's actually a resident of this community in Lakewood, right on the West 117th border. And she did a great piece about Birdtown, the less affluent neighborhood in Lakewood, being sort of confronted by its location directly next to a factory, right? So right across the street from a number of the homes is a factory called Neograph. And because the homes are zoned residential, the noise decibel limit is like 30, I want to say, something along those lines. But the factory doesn't have those same noise limits. And so there's been significant noise pollution according to some of the residents.
Because it's across the street?
Because it's across the street.
Wow.
And so there's this conflict between residents saying, well, this is zoned residential. How do we deal with this? This is obviously not allowed. And a factory going, we've been here for 100 years and we should be able to run our machines as we need to run them. And so Ava captured the sort of conflict between what the city is trying to manage between residents and a corporation or a factory that's been there for a century.
So how do we go from we're bringing this to your attention to the solutions part?
Yeah, so what we do, and coincidentally, the council person who now is partially responsible for that ward went through our community journalism program before becoming the Lakewood City Council person. His name's Matt Bixenstein. So what we do is we ask Matt, hey, first, can you talk about this from a city council perspective? Would you be willing to write about this? But we also ask Ava and others to look at how have other communities responded to similar issues, what's going to happen, and what are residents proposing, and what is the efficacy of it? Because I think for some residents, maybe it's just shut the factory down, and that's obviously not tenable. So it's looking at the different proposals that make their way through the community after this initial stage of reporting.
Okay, well, hopefully that will get resolved. Now, in terms of a business model, right? As I said in the introduction, right? Journalism is in a real crossroads, or it's been for a while, right? We have a newspaper in the city that doesn't really have home delivery very much. It's a printed version is quite tiny. So the advertising models that traditionally have paid for journalism have fallen. Subscriptions don't exist really anymore. Have you considered having a paywall for the land? I know you work with a lot of external funders. How it's kind of got to be a little bit tenuous. We're worrying whether those funding will keep continuing, right?
Sure. I think everybody in journalism has sweaty palms 90% of the time. I think outside of the New York Times and a handful of national pubs who do have success with the paywall and the subscription model, it hasn't worked well for most outlets. I think from a local news standpoint, what we do is try and respond to a crisis that's been going on for 25 years, really since the advent of the internet, which is our content has been given away for free since the internet came to be. And so much of social media and Google and other search engines was built upon the backs of journalists' work, and it was given away for free. And now it's the question of how do we compensate journalists for work that is audiences are expecting to get it for free, right? And so one of the things that we've attempted, like so many other outlets across the country, is the nonprofit model, which is we have individual donors, which sort of replaces the subscribers. We have underwriting, which is sort of almost equivalent to advertising. But the third leg is something that for-profit publications don't have, which is the grant funding, right? We can go out to Cuyahoga Arts and Culture. We can go out to Ohio Arts Council. We can go to private foundations and apply for funding and say, you know, how can we make this work so that we're an asset to the community? How do we explain ourselves as an asset to the community? And I think that's been part of our mission as a nonprofit journalism group, is not only to advocate on our behalf, but to advocate on behalf of all local news and make it clear that we are a fundamental operating mechanism for a functional democracy.
Sure, people need the news. They need to learn about issues, then they can participate better in democracy. That's a core value. For me, that's a core value I teach my students all the time. What about AI? Let's talk about that. Certainly, there are other news organizations in the city that have been touting how proud they are in terms of using AI and what they can do. Does that have any role in this kind of solutions journalism? I'm not going to use the word hyper-local, but local
community
local journalism.
news.
Yeah, can AI, scour, Reddit sites or other places to figure out, okay, is there a news story bubbling here that I'm not aware of?
I mean, I'm sure it could. I think for me personally, for the land, we don't utilize AI in almost any aspect. We use it for transcription, right? But even with that, we tell our writers, you need to go back and check anything that it was told you was in this interview. We don't use it to write or edit. And I think there's a bunch of reasons for that. One is and this is just this is not just my cynicism towards the technology, this is also reading the numbers, right? Statistically, people who find out that news is produced with the aid of AI or by AI are less likely to trust your organization ever again. And if you don't reveal that you're using AI, they're also less likely to ever trust you again. So you're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place if you are using AI, because people don't want you to use it, so maybe the instinct is to not immediately be transparent about that usage. And the flip side is, if you are transparent, they still don't necessarily want to work with you or read your content because it's less trustworthy. For us specifically, as a community news model that trains people in the community to go out and do these stories, I think it would be extremely hypocritical of us to ask our writers to go out, be part of this community, tell us the stories that matter, and then also we're going to ask a software program to write the story. I think that would be extremely disingenuous. So we don't actually use it at our site.
Do you have any pushback from any reporters or anybody in your staff saying, we should do it, or you guys are pretty much
No, I think most people who come in are extremely skeptical of the technology. Occasionally we'll get somebody who has a passing interest in it, but nobody yet has come in and said, I insist on using this for my writing.
Mm-hmm. Well, we got a few minutes left. There are certainly some students and young people who are probably watching this who are like, oh, Chris Mosby of the Land, what advice can he give me? I'm interested in going to journalism, but I see major layoffs at major news organizations across the country. Is this something that I should be doing? And if I am, what kind of advice would you give to them?
Yeah,
even high school students, perhaps, or parents of high school students who are interested.
How do I assuage the fear of a parent?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know that I can easily assuage that fear, but I think what I would say to somebody who's interested in it is, one, journalism's a calling, right? I think every journalist could probably make more money doing something else. I think most journalists I've met are extremely intelligent, very skilled, and very adaptable. I think in our specific industry, you do it because it's a calling. It gets into your blood. I've always described it like a virus. Like, I can't get rid of it. I love this industry too much. It's going to stay with me forever. I think for somebody who is interested in this, I'd say start early, start getting those clippings. We've had high school students come in and go through our community journalism program. We've had college students come in and get published through The Land. Obviously we have interns with Cleveland State University, but we've worked with other students at other universities and high schools. I would say start getting those clippings, but also explore all of the different aspects of our industry, because so often now reporters are being asked to also be editors, to also be photographers, to also be videographers, to also be search engine optimization experts, to be social media wizards. Like, you have to have all these skills, so start to build that out. And as much as I personally think a reporter should be allowed to be boring, the reporting shouldn't be boring, a reporter should be allowed to be boring. I think that so often what reporters are asked to do now is develop that sort of personality that people come to associate with specific stories or expect on that social media voice. They want to follow and feel attached to that person. I don't always think that's necessarily the healthiest thing in the world for the followers, but I think for a journalist, it's a useful skill to develop the ability to communicate who you are, what you do, and why you do it.
You use the word clippings. I know what that is, but tell our viewers what do you mean by the word clippings? If there's some parents out there like, my child needs clippings, what does that mean?
I need a scrapbook. No, it's literally just getting published. It's a story that we used to say you would clip it out of the paper. So it's your story in a publication. So go find local news outlets or any legitimate publication that needs stories, and you will have a clipping as soon as you get published.
So you're describing something that we tell our students all the time, which is, you need to be, we used to use the term multimedia journalist, covering multimedia, but learning all of those different skills. You don't know which one is going to be the one that's going to really help you. So that's what we're doing. Tell me about video. Are you moving into that direction? Because certainly we see a lot of legacy media, traditional print media now. Reporters need to be on the air. They need to look into the camera like I am and be polished and be able to speak and look good and tell the story that way. That's not something that traditional print journalists were used to be doing.
Yeah, I'm used to being frumpy, so it's a big barrier for me to jump that. I think, video is a major component, and it's something we weren't set up to do when I came in. We're starting to explore it now. We actually have a student intern right now working on a mini documentary that's going to accompany a feature piece we're working on. We've started to talk about doing more vertical video, which for those who don't know, it's sort of the format that TikTok or Instagram uses on their reels. And it's just because that's where so many readers are starting to consume content. I know of other nonprofit publications that we've worked with where that is the primary mechanism for delivering their content is through vertical video, and then using that to transport people to other aspects of the business or to the other aspects of the organization.
Hopefully start with a 60-second or less video and then move to read more deeper into the story.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, hopefully it's a hook.
Hopefully that's good. What, one more time, tell me, so if people are interested in joining the program, learning to the next class, where should they go to find that information?
Go to thelandcle.org. And on our homepage, you'll see a little tab that says Write for Us. You can just click Become a Community Journalist. You can apply right there.
Okay, I think it's great opportunities for lots of students, lots of any community members. As you said, 17 to 77, if you, whatever range it is, and you can get involved and report both on your community and other things as well. Chris Mosby, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here today on Cleveland Conversations.
Thanks so much for having me, Ed.
We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.